Hello, everyone. My name is Ben Marchman with NatureLink, and I want to welcome you to the FireKeepers Global Summit, in which we'll gather for powerful conversations with cutting-edge experts and thought leaders who will guide you to connect to your truest self and activate your natural gifts. This event is designed to reinstate the importance of carrying our soul-directed vision back into our communities so that ourselves and our communities will flourish. Here you're invited to learn how to seek the guidance of your inner voice so that you can truly understand what it means to live life with purpose. I'm very excited to talk with Trebbe Johnson today. Trebbe is the author of Radical Joy for Hard Times, Finding Meaning in Making Bounty in Earth's Broken Places.
Beauty.
Right. Found in Making Beauty in Earth's Broken Places. Thanks for catching that. I was
Oh yeah, I'd catch that.
reading a typo. And the world is awaiting lover, desire, and the quest for the beloved, and 100 ways to make guerrilla beauty. I love that title. As well as many articles and essays that explore the human bond with nature. He's also the founder and director of the global community Radical Joy for Hard Times, devoted to finding and making beauty in wounded places. Trebbe speaks 4 languages and, Trebbe speaks 4 languages, has camped alone in the Arctic wilderness, studied classical Indian dance, and worked as an artist model, a street sweeper in an English village, and an award-winning multimedia producer. She lives in rural northeastern Pennsylvania. And Trebbe, I'm excited to talk to you today about your topic, which is beauty might just save the earth, or at least your life on earth.
Yeah, me too.
And welcome to the call today. I'm going to invite 2 more people who are waiting to come in here as we're talking. And welcome. And people who are coming in late before Trebbe starts to speak here, we've just gone through the introduction.
Wow, that's changed a bit then for you, for your mom, huh?
Whoop. And so if you're on mute, just stay muted, and then you can put your name and your location in the chat. But welcome, Trebbe, and latecomers to the group here.
Thank you.
And, I'll allow you to get started and expound a little bit on your bio there. So welcome.
Oh, well, I don't know how to expound on my bio. I mean, I'll just say that I put all that stuff in at the end because I used to read books by male poets, and they always had all this cool stuff on their bio, like he worked as a salmon fisherman and a timberer and a fire watcher in the Rocky Mountains. And I just thought, well, I've done some cool stuff too, so I'm just going to find some of it and put it in there. So that's what I did.
Yeah, I love that because you went from you're an author as well, but also you've done so much in your past life too, like being a street sweeper.
Yes.
And that's just
writing has been the thread throughout all of it. I've been a writer longer than I've been anything else.
Yeah, it's great. Well, I guess since we're talking about more of your writing past, and a couple of my questions were about your books, but do you first want to talk about your global community and how you kind of came into starting this community, which is called Radical Joy for Hard Times?
Radical Joy for Hard Times. Yeah, I actually had the impulse to do something years before the final result came about, because when I was doing multimedia productions in New York in the 80s, I interviewed a man from the Oneida Nation. And we did a video about him, and he told me a story about receiving a prestigious National Science Foundation grant to recycle steel waste. And he was really pumped, he was under 40, he was the first Native American ever to get this grant. And so he climbed up to the top of this mountain with his buckets to get samples. And he said to the mountain, this huge mountain of steel waste, he said, "I will conquer you." And then he got back down with his buckets, and he just knew that that wasn't the right way to approach this. That wasn't the way he'd been taught in his tradition. And so he said, I realized, he prayed to Creator, show me the right way to be with this. And he said he realized that the waste was not an enemy to be conquered. It was an orphan that had gotten separated from the circle of life. And his job was to bring it back to the circle of life. And I was so touched by that. And it just made sense to me on the deepest level. And I just started thinking, what does this mean for me? What can I learn about this? How can I introduce this so it matters to people in a different way? And I tried all kinds of things at first. Like I led a week-long vigil in a clear-cut forest on British Columbia, on Vancouver Island. I did a ceremony at Ground Zero after September 11th. And what I found out was people liked the idea of breaking beauty for hurt places, but they didn't necessarily want to pay for it. You know, let's do a vigil in a cloverleaf on a highway. You know, how much will it cost? No, I don't think so. So eventually, while doing a fast of my own in Eastern California, I realized that I needed to form a nonprofit, and it's called Radical Joy for Hard Times. And it's a global community which is dedicated to finding and making beauty in hurt places. And we have some simple suggestions, the most important of which are go to a wounded place, and the last of which is make beauty for it out of materials you find on site. And I know at least several of the people that are on the call right now have done this and have participated in that and done just amazing and beautiful things. So it feels to me like, you know, I know your whole focus of the FireKeepers Summit is your soul's calling. And to me, it feels like finding and making beauty for hurt places is my soul's calling. And I'm going to restate that. It is my soul's calling. I have no doubt about it. And I sometimes say to people, this work, this path is not a good idea that I got. It is what the earth wants me to do. It's what my ancestors want me to do. It's why I'm here. So I feel completely engaged in it, and the experiences that people have when they do this work are very profound, and they're usually not what they expect. You know, so it's beautiful work.
Yeah. And that last piece that you added in, which is beautiful work, by the way. And I'm curious, because you said something about people on this call that have done this work. So it'd be fun to engage in that to see what their experience is.
Yeah, yeah.
And what you just kind of mentioned at the end, it is your work, and you've been excited on the journey where it's taken you, and that's what a lot of speakers are talking about on the summit, and I can relate his personal experience in with working with people and rites of passage work that you don't know where it's going to go. And that's what's so fun about the soul and trying to control the ego. It's literally impossible. And we got somebody else coming in here. We got some latecomers today. Hey, Pamela. And as you come in, just make sure you're muted on the call. And so I guess since we're up at that piece, is there anybody? It looks like we have Janet and Valerie, Kathy, and Pamela. And I think Trebbe, you might know some of these people.
I do. I know Anne and Janet.
Okay. And Anne, I just want to hear what your experience was being part of this community with Trebbe. And I'll unmute you here.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that because I can't stay very long. I've known Trebbe almost since she first had this vision of bringing this beautiful work to our world, and I'm a tremendous supporter of this vision. I think it's extremely timely and very needed, and I'm really happy it's going global. So I live in Southern Oregon, and I'm at the foothills of the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument, which is endangered because it is a monument. And so let's see, Rad Joy's been meeting for 10 years now, Trebbe, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. So maybe 8 of those 10 years, I go to the chairperson of the monument and ask him where in the monument is this kind of thing needed. And he takes us into places that are either endangered or have been clear cut or, you know, all that kind of thing. And we put it out into the community and people come and we do this very simple thing together. And it introduces us to the land and we get a chance to connect deeply with the land. But most of all, we get to see it in a new way, which is there is beauty everywhere. And so that's what we're cultivating. And so I'm really happy that Trebbe's on the call, and what she has to offer is of tremendous value and needed in these times. So that's my check-in.
Thank you, Anne.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be leaving in just a few minutes, but Trebbe, blessings. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, I love you. No, I'll stay for a few minutes. Thank you for letting me share this. Yeah. And we had, Trump's representative here last summer looking around to see if he would, lift his support for the monument. And so far we're safe. And the chairperson of the monument has been on some of these programs, and he really feels that the ceremony has helped a lot to take care of this monument, which contains in it life forms that don't exist anywhere else on the planet. We have life forms here that don't exist anywhere else. So that includes butterflies and insects and flowers and trees. So it's a very unique place that needs to be cared for. And I absolutely attribute part of that safety to the ceremony.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Thank you for sharing, Anne.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for allowing that to happen, Trebbe. And so that kind of goes into, I guess, the next question I had, because a lot of the work that you talk about is kind of in the realms of anxiety and despair, but also how we are taking so much meaning and life from the earth and working for the earth. And that's a lot of your involvement in what you talk about. So I guess that was kind of the first question, really. How do we manage not just surviving, but how do we experience this meaning and joy?
Well, I know a lot of the people that you've been talking to for this summit, and what we have in common is bringing people into the wilderness and showing them, and it's really simple, how to get insight and guidance and meaning when you're alone in the wilderness, fasting and focusing and with no distractions. It's profound. And eco-psychology is doing kind of the same thing. It's saying we have to bring our understanding of who we are as human beings outside of our family and our office and our boss. I'd like break it out of the walls and say, how is the natural world affecting who we are and what our mental health is? And yet we've come to a place in our planetary and our human history where it has to be bigger than that. We can't anymore only go out into nature and say, what is nature going to give me? We have to start saying, what can I give back? What must I give back? It's not just about desert, creosote bush, give me a vision for my future. It's desert, creosote bush, what do you need from me? How can I help? It has to work both ways. Eco-psychology has to ask not just how do I go into beautiful nature and get cheered up if I have trauma in my family, or not cheer. How do I get insight? We have to go in and do ceremony, like Anne was saying, for these places. And to do that, to take these simple actions of giving beauty, it sounds really simple. To find beauty and to give beauty, it is amazingly empowering. As Anne or as Janet or as anybody who's ever done these ceremonies can attest, when you go from a place of powerlessness or despair at the very thought of facing a place that's hurt, whether it's a mountain that's been stripped for coal mining, like it is where Janet lives, or whether it's a place that's endangered, or by with the prospect of clear cutting, or whether it's gas fracking, or it's a river that's polluted. People tend to think, I can't possibly go there. I just fall into a pit of depression from which I would never be able to crawl out. And yet it really isn't like that, because you go, you find how nature is becoming rejuvenated, and you also are doing it with other people who love the place. And by being there and sharing your stories about what the place means to you, it's like you come back into relationship with this place. Because when we're not paying attention, nature can just sort of seem like a backdrop. And when we're there with meaning and focus on a fast, say, of 4 days, you deeply absorb and are absorbed by that place where you are. But it can also happen in a much quicker, simpler, easier, more accessible way, just when you go there with the intent of giving a little gift of beauty or consolation back to a place that you care about that's been hurt. And what's been true for me in my life for as long as I can remember, it's maybe the oldest thing that I have known for certainty, is that you don't have to choose between beauty and sorrow, that they exist side by side. And if you're in a place of despair, whether it's about something that's happened in your own life, or if it's a place that you're in that's hurt, and you are struck by something beautiful, like the song of a bird in a clear-cut forest, you don't have to say, I have to choose. Is it the bird or is it the clear cut? Is it my absolute delight that I hear the bird, or is it my absolute grief that I am in this place? You don't have to choose, that they exist side by side. And knowing that these things exist side by side is the only way to survive. Because that way we are able to maintain a balance no matter what is going on in our life. And, like all of us, I've been through some horrendous times in my life. But if we're able to see beauty and make beauty, and sometimes that beauty is like with the message of Radical Joy for Hard Times, is we make it for places, but it's also, you can make it for people. And as long as we can find and make beauty, we have a way of surviving. And we need simple, accessible, handy ways of surviving through the difficult climactic times that we're heading towards, and the environmental problems that we already have. We need these ways of not just surviving, but of thriving, and of bringing meaning, playfulness, creativity, friendship, compassion into our lives. So that was a kind of like an all-encompassing answer to your question.
Yeah, that's a broad question. I thought you did a great job answering that. Thank you. And yeah, it's kind of leading into my next question that might help you expound a little bit on that. Actually, not really going into corporation too much, but I guess it kind of was. But I was catching it about making beauty, like, and how you were kind of talking about how beauty, making the day out of the beauty that you're finding, which is so beautiful, and I like how you phrased that. And how would one that's like affected by the climate, you kind of mentioned Anne, who I think had to leave the call early, but how would one that's affected by the climate and like our times now, if they're truly are affected by, like, our economical stage and our climate change, and how would you recommend that we kind of incorporate this making of beauty and the finding of it that you were just mentioning in our daily lives?
Well, there's a philosopher named Timothy Morton who I really like and read a lot. And he talks about climate change as what he calls climate change a hyperobject. That means it's everywhere, but you can't touch it. You can't get away from it, but you can't point to it and say, that's climate change, that's climate change. Like you can point to a tornado. There it is, it's coming. There it left, it's done this. So what Radical Joy for Hard Times focuses on, what I focus on in my writing about it, is that it's about being in your place, being present in your place. So how does climate change affect me here in northeastern Pennsylvania? Well, I've noticed a lot fewer birds since I've lived here for 30 years. There are a lot fewer bird species, and there are a lot fewer birds who come every year. There are a lot fewer bees. So I can do, and there aren't any bats. We haven't had any bats around here for about 10 years because there's a terrible disease that affects eastern bats. So I do my ceremonies here for those animals, you know, and for the plants that are hurt, and for the ash trees that are having to be cut down because of an emerald ash borer. I can give direct and immediate and personal attention to what's right in my own place. I can't give beauty to the earth about climate change in a way that feels immediate to me. But I can look at what's visible, and I think that's really all any of us can do with climate change. Although, you know, one of the things that we've been trying to figure out with Radical Joy for Hard Times from the very start is how can we share the grief and the sorrow with one another when it goes on in a different part of the world. For example, I know, you know, there's so many people right now that are really in co-grief with the people of Eastern Australia who've been having all these horrible fires. You know, would there be some way that we could share in that and make beauty for them or whatever? That isn't anything I have an answer to yet. But the thing about making simple acts of beauty, and the reason we came up with Radical Joy for Hard Times, for doing it, making beauty out of materials you find on site rather than feeling like, well, I have to haul in a bunch of stuff, you know, paint, ribbons, sage, whatever. You know, I have to be an artist. I have to be organized. I have to do it with other people. We don't need to do any of that because the earth itself has everything we need in order to make beauty for it. So when people do our events, which they're called, every year we do one that's called the Global Earth Exchange, which is the one Anne was mentioning. It's in June, and people all over the world go to places they love and make beauty for them. We say, make beauty out of what the earth itself offers, which is sticks or stones or flowers, or sometimes people do it with rubbish that they then pack up and take out. And it's a reminder, like just as we learn if we're in with, you know, a good guide or a therapist, that you don't need to be somebody else in order to be your own integrated, full, beautiful, radiant self. You just have to bring that out. You have to take away what's getting in the way and bring the inside out. It's the same thing with a place. The place has an inherent beauty and integrity. And by making the beauty for the place, we're reminded of that. And it's a subtle reminder too, that I too have my own beauty. I have everything I need here to make beauty. And when you make beauty for a place too, it's an action that transcends any kind of difference. Gender difference, racial difference in whether somebody's physical ability, age difference. I mean, people of all ages have participated in this. People who can't walk, babies, men, women, you know, gay, straight, trans. It's everybody can make beauty, and everybody loves a place, and everybody feels grief when something happens to that place.
Those are powerful words, and on the process of making beauty. And I love how you pull that into your work. Would you want to expound a little bit on, or if you want Janet to help you expound a little bit on, I like this interaction that we had with Anne. If you want Janet, if you want to speak up about the process that you went through with Trebbe on.
Yeah, and Janet and her group in the Ohio Valley Environmental Coalition also did they participated in a project we did in 2015 called The Ground Beneath Our Hearts. So she's done several things.
Yeah, Janet, you just mind saying a few words?
Just a few words. So the Ohio Valley Environmental Coalition for more than a decade, and actually still continues to fight mountaintop removal coal mining in West Virginia that obliterates mountains and destroys communities and streams and everything else that's there. And Trebbe was in touch with us about the possibility of doing a project called The Ground Beneath Our Hearts. And there were groups across the globe that were also taking part in this. And our volunteers gathered near a mountaintop removal site in West Virginia and brought meaningful objects that they had and told stories about what the mountains meant to them. And actually, I think for example, a beautiful prayer flag that was exhibited and then taken other places. And so that was our first introduction. And in West Virginia, just so everyone knows here, because the state has been a resource colony for a very long time with a lot of powers that fight against anyone who goes against the grain. So that was our first introduction, and then and that was very well attended, and folks got a lot out of it, singing and stories and prayers. It was quite nice. And then when we were approached to take part in one of the global earth exchanges, beyond having issues with the coal industry, the oil and gas industry has been ginning up its activities for about 12 years here. And ground zero is in north central West Virginia, where there's a lot of fracking, and then all along the Ohio River. And the Ohio River, it's the most polluted river in the nation, and that provides drinking water for 5 million people. So we chose and have chosen for 2 years in a row to go to the Ohio River to express our gratitude, to make beauty there, to tell stories about what the meaning that the river has for each of us, what it's given to us. And personally for me, for example, as a child, I used to go with my father to fish on the river, and we ate fish from the river. You can't do that now. It might have even been a little iffy back then, but you certainly wouldn't do that now. But and I really think it's having an impact. And it's not the kind of thing that you can see, but we're seeing, the oil and gas industry is starting to pull back because the economics is getting difficult. And at the same time, there's a rising tide of the global climate change activists. And people can no longer deny the impacts of fossil fuel use and on our lives as a whole. So, and I personally have to do these hopeful things now. I'm retired, and I used to be on the front lines, and I really felt like there was a need for me to stay engaged, but to do this work in a different way. And so that's one of the reasons I continue to be connected with Radical Joy. So it's good.
Beautiful. And I think you're broken up at the end, but I think we got your words at the end there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. And thank you, Trebbe, for allowing that. Yeah, and Janet, to do that in a community like you're saying that it goes against the grain on your values and your word, that's so I honor you for doing that. That's pretty amazing. And also in a community setting. And so Trebbe, I guess we'll pass the candle back to you. So this making beauty conversation I guess has come up. We can stick with that if you want to. And I was just kind of curious, in your own words, like why is beauty so important for a community?
Well, if you share a love of a place, it's beautiful to you. And when the place is torn up, the beauty is threatened. And it's not just physical beauty. It's not just like a sunset or spring flowers coming up. It's the beauty that you feel in your hearts when you look at this place. It's it's hearing the spring peepers on the pond, you know, for the first time in the spring. It's little bitty things, and they connect you with this place. It's the beauty. We have such a deep connection with our places. Not only the places where we've grown up, and we may not have such a deep connection with them, but we have deep connections with a lot of places. And our philosophical perspective, our spiritual perspective is tied in with those places and their wholeness and their relevance to us and how they touch us. I always thought it was so amazing that every time, you know, it didn't work the last time, unfortunately, but every time Congress opened up a discussion about drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, they would get flooded with millions and millions of letters from people who said, no, don't do that. We don't want you to do that. And, you know, very, very few people have ever been to the Arctic, but it was important to people. It was like people needed to believe in the Arctic. The Arctic was beautiful in people's hearts. It was wild, you know, caribou lived there, and polar bears lived there, and grizzlies lived there, and plants that aren't seen anywhere else lived there, and eagles. It was meaningful to people. And they didn't want it damaged. It was like the Arctic needed to exist. And so coming together, I actually really love this question, because beauty is not just physical. It's mental, it's spiritual, it's biographical. And in my community, I live in the third poorest county in Pennsylvania. It's rural, it's conservative, it's blue collar. A lot of people don't have jobs. And yet I belong to a group that is a very active environmental group. And I invited them to do one of our global earth exchanges a couple years ago around the Susquehanna River, which before the Ohio River took off that dubious title, the Susquehanna was the most polluted river in America because of gas fracking. And so we had Republicans and Democrats and Mormons and Catholics and one Jew and a lot of just sort of spiritual pilgrims like me, you know, different kinds of people with different kinds of jobs gathering at the river to share our stories. And then we joined together and we wove a wreath and we placed it in the river and wished the river well. You know, so that was a ceremony that transcended all the kinds of differences that people have. And we came together around our love of this area. And what people said at the end about when they were putting this wreath into the river was they were mentioning all the things that they love and that they find beautiful about this area. So it's generally a thing that transcends all these differences that we normally have in life.
Wow. And what powerful actions that you're taking up there. I'm just I feel very honored to be talking to you in your space that you're working in up in that area, because I can relate to that being here in the South, which it can be very similar. And yeah, and that's such a broad-ended question. Like, why is it so important? Because, you know, people, of course, be like, yeah, beauty is important, but they really, like you explained it, like it's not just something you're seeing physical, it's something that we're embodying, and it's what's building all of us to be so connected in relationships. Really liked how you explained that. And just going back to your book a little bit, we've hinted a little bit on, but we haven't dove too deep into it. I think it was the question might come out of your second one, I think. The world is awaiting lover, desire, and the quest for the beloved.
That was the first book.
Yeah. Oh, that was the first book. That was your first book. And your second one that's what it was. I messed up your genealogy.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, the second one was 101 Ways to Make Guerrilla Beauty.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
And in your new book, you describe like heroes and heroines in like really unique ways. I've actually was reading a piece on that earlier before our call. And you describe the kinds of heroes and heroines in a certain way that you believe are responsible for helping our communities cope with climate change and other challenges, which is, I think, it's a really unique way to describe what's going on in our world. And can you say more about what these heroes and heroines will look like and how they will act in the future?
Yeah, I mean, so what's going to be necessary is living with hard times. And people throughout human history have lived with hard times, but we've never had to live with the hard time of facing the dying of the earth. You know, the earth is going to survive. My friend David Paulus, the Oneida man who gave me this inspiration to begin with, he always says the earth is going to survive long, long, long after any of us. However, the earth that we know and love is fading and dying. So the heroines and heroes of the future are going to have to live with this, not only in themselves, but in their communities and in their friends and their loved ones. And they're going to have to negotiate all kinds of different attitudes about this. Where, you know, from I'm too depressed, I can't think about it, to we have to get out on the front lines. We don't have any time to make beauty. I get that from people sometimes. And they're going to have to be able to go back and forth and keep on maintaining their sanity by bringing people together, by making beauty, by looking for beauty, and by acting as generously as possible in the moment. And a lot of that is just doing anonymous acts of beauty and random acts of generosity. I used to have a bumper sticker that said something like that. And it's a way of, I think of it as a way of being at play in the world, even under hard times. Like I did a workshop a couple of years ago, and I assigned all the people in the workshop the task of making an anonymous, doing an anonymous act of beauty for a person, place, or animal during the course of the weekend. And then at the very end, they put all the things that they'd done in a basket, and we shared them anonymously. And it was fun. You know, it's a way for people to have fun. And so we're going to have to be the heroes and heroines of the future. We're going to have to balance this very difficult relationship between sorrow and joy and beauty and ugliness and reality and the need to escape from reality, which we're going to have to do. And we're also going to have to realize that things like ceremony and attention and vigils, but vigils with meaning and playfulness, not just anger, coming together out of a sense of delight and joy and creativity rather than just anger and protest. All of that's going to be really important, and maintaining that balance, knowing that you don't have to choose, that there's room for all of it.
Beautiful words. Gosh, I wish we could like pick apart all of your writings, because they speak so poetically and to our world, and how we just really need to listen to that beauty that's speaking inside of all of us. And another question that kind of expounds a little bit on that, because in a lot of your books, you travel up to all these places that are either like kind of damaged or endangered, I would say. And the question with that was this: why is it so important to be doing this in our work now, to be in these places that are damaged and endangered, and to be seeking this beauty? But also, it's kind of a two-part question. And then want to just make us more depressed and kind of like, I would say, like high anxiety being in these places if we're constantly going to these areas of our world.
Yeah, good question. I mean, actually, the reverse is true. It's kind of like when you're trying to deal with a deep-seated inner wound, you can't deal with it if you're just putting off dealing with it. If you just keep sticking it in the closet and saying, I can't possibly deal with that because I'm just going to be too depressed or too angry, or I'm going to go out and murder somebody than my family. It's the same thing with, you have to deal with it. And when you deal with it, it's like it starts softening in front of you almost. And you start to see you start to see how it's part of your life and how it's part of your biography. And it's the same thing with going to a place. People often think, I just can't possibly do that. I'm going to be too sad. But when you get there, you realize that this place it still exists. Even if it's been mowed down and there's a shopping mall there, your memories are there. So it continues to exist in you. And you always are able to find some kind of beauty there. I have yet to ever hear from anybody who's done anything. You know, it could happen one day. There's just absolutely no beauty here. But then again, the beauty is that somebody took the time to go and sit with one of these places with the willingness to learn. So, you know, there are abundant ways to find beauty. And also by going to a wounded place. And I use that word wounded deliberately. Some people don't like it. They wanted to call it something else. But for me, to call a place wounded is important, because a wound is something that's often applied to a human, but it can also be applied to an earth, to be applied to a place. And when we go to these places and we accept them and we love them despite what has happened to them, and we give this gift back to them that we create. And then maybe it's a gift of consolation or sympathy or gratitude or sorrow or love, but it's a gift back. It's a way of giving back and acknowledging what these places have, how much they've given to us, and beyond us personally, human life, animal life, bears, caterpillars, you know, water, the banks of rivers. We see that everything on the earth is an integral part of the earth. The clear cut is a part of the earth. The mountain that's had its top shorn off is a part of the earth. The ocean that is devoid, the sea that's devoid of life because it's been polluted, it's part of the earth. And we are part of the earth. And we are wounded beings too. We're never going to not be wounded beings. So it's a way of reminding ourselves in subtle but profound ways that even though we have problems, we have wounds, we're still part of the whole. And it's the same with the earth. It's the same with all of these places. And I've just thought about one of the stories that has stuck with me, an event that Janet was talking about, the ground beneath our hearts. And one of the things that one of the women brought that was meaningful to her was a ball of clay from a pond that was important to her, and that was right by the site of this mountaintop mining. You know, it's this little ball of clay that is part of the earth and part of her memory of that place and part of what's happened to the place. It's just so much more profound than we know it is. And when we go out and do these simple acts, we're just amazed at what happens. People are constantly, and I'll just conclude by saying we often get letters at Radical Joy for Hard Times and emails from people who say, I didn't want to go and do this silly thing that my friend wanted to do, but I went because I love my friend, and I ended up falling in love with this most unlikely place. You fell in love.
Yeah, and I love how all these experiences are obviously elevated when they're with somebody else. I could see Janet when you're talking to Anne with Anne earlier, that they're so excited to speak about their experience, and it just gets pushed and pushed more with other people that are just listening, that are experiencing that with you. It's just the amazing part of being human.
And it is, as you say, it is experiential. It's not, you don't read about it, you're not looking at it on your phone, you're there.
And then when we're mirroring those, like you're saying, mirroring those emotions back to each other, it can just be so powerful. Mm-hmm. I love that. And I didn't want to close out too far. We're getting pretty close to the end of the call, but I did want to steer a little bit away from the books if you want to, because we can't. I was smiling because we can't miss the last part of your bio. Those small little things you mentioned at the end, saying "Oh, I also speak 4 languages, camped alone in the Arctic, a street sweeper." And so I was wondering if you wanted to talk just a little bit more even though we're kind of going backwards, but this is something we didn't touch base on at the beginning, about how these travels and these experiences and what it looks like to an outsider, like these amazing jobs, have still brought you onto your path of what you do today.
Well, with the exception of the languages, which I just really like studying languages, they've all had to do with the earth, really. I mean, I was a street sweeper because when I was 25, I quit a really good job with working as an assistant to a best-selling author, and I moved to a 250-year-old cottage in the countryside in the Berkshire Downs of England. And I was trying to live on £5 a week. And when I couldn't do that anymore, I got a job as my village street sweeper. And I would clean the manure off of this little street in this little old village. And that was enough to last there for a few more weeks. So that was about that. I got to the Arctic because I had been leading wilderness rites of passage trips for many years, and a Mohawk guy, of all things, got in touch. Mohawks are from New York, but he had grown up in Alaska, and he wanted to do a trip with me. So I was honored, but we didn't get enough people. So I went on my own, and I found this outfitter and asked if somebody could walk me up and to a place and leave me there for 4 or 5 days and come back for me. And he said, no, we can't do that. And I was disappointed. He said, but we could fly you there. And so I took the train from Anchorage to Fairbanks, and then I took another little plane from Fairbanks to Bettles, which is only accessible by dog sled and plane. And then from there, I took a tiny little 2-seater World War II plane, and he dropped me off in a lake, like 250 miles above the Arctic Circle. And I stayed there for 5 days and 4 nights. And I just really wanted to experience utter extreme wilderness. And that was it. You know, it was just magical. It was like I didn't fast. I wasn't there to gain a spiritual experience. I just wanted to be in that utter wilderness. And I'm so glad I did it. You know, I'm just really, really glad I did it, because it was quiet and beautiful and scary, and just, it was so quiet you could hear mice moving through the leaves. You know, it was really beautiful.
Wow. Yeah, I'm just enthralled with all your stories. And we're at the top of the hour here, but we still have some time to add in anything that maybe I didn't touch base on, or do you want to expound on anything that felt that it needed more of an ending?
I don't think so. I'm curious about, I'm kind of I guess I'll close by this. When I interviewed this man, David Powless, it was 1987. So that was a long time before I finally figured out what to do with that image that he gave me. I had no idea that climate change was going to be a thing. I had no idea that I was going to end up living in a place where there's gas fracking. So it's just amazing to me. A lot of times I just am awed by the fact that I happen to be born at this particular time of life and into this particular body and circumstance, and that would be just ignited by this simple thing, you know, the waste is an orphan from the circle of life. And that we are living in a time now, which I really do believe that those of us who are conscious and trying to figure out a way how to live with this overwhelming crisis that we're facing, with consciousness and generosity and a willingness to listen, we really are lucky and gifted. And whatever we can do with that is meaningful.
Yeah, definitely. I can definitely agree with that. And is there any, before we go into your free gift and like leaving with like some final words, is there any like questions or anything that you all have for, looks like we lost a couple people on the call, for Trebbe? Pamela's been pretty quiet back there. And I'll unmute everybody just so you can pipe in. We have a small crew tonight, it seems like. Any questions that arise from you? And if you don't want to ask in the chat, you can, in the audio, you can always add into the chat. Excuse me, I'm stumbling over some words today.
Now, I just wanted to say this was my first time with listening to her, but it was just because I was inspired with all that she's done, and I'm kind of in that same boat of living off the land and, traveling and, so I just really wanted to listen to her and see what she had to say and what she could bring. So this is very interesting, and I'm glad I was able to join.
Glad you were too, Valerie.
Yeah, thank you for joining. Janet, do you want to add anything else in, or any other questions you have for Trebbe?
Let me think.
Okay.
It says my connection is really unstable. I'm good. All right.
Yeah, it's a little shifty, but it's okay. We can hear a little bit.
So I'll say one more thing. The next Global Earth Exchange is June 20th, 2020. And that's the day when people all over the world are going to be going to places they love that have been damaged and finding and making beauty for them. So you can go to our website. All the information isn't quite up yet, but it will be very soon. radicaljoy.org. And my email is trebbe@radicaljoy.org. And I just invite everybody to go to a place that you care about, and there's lots of information and tons of stories. There are already tons of stories on the website from last year's Global Earth Exchange. You can read Janet's story and Ann's story and lots of other stories, and experience it for yourself, what it's like to go to a wounded place and find and make beauty.
Yeah, I like that. And I'll write that in the chat. What's the date of the Global Earth Exchange?
June 20th.
June 20th.
Worldwide.
That's easy to remember. June 20, 2020. There you go.
Yes, I know.
And
And I want to thank you. I think this whole thing that you're doing with the FireKeepers is such an amazing, ambitious, visionary project, and good for you for doing it.
yeah, I really appreciate it. And I've been inspired by people like you, as well as everybody. Really, every speaker's brought their entirely different view on really just how they're sharing their gifts to the world. And I've just been really inspired by everybody. So, as well as you today. And you kind of left us with some words of wisdom at the end there, but I wanted to give you time too to talk about your free gift. Which is, I think you mentioned it was on your website. If you want to tell the listeners and the viewers. And before you tell them that, you can find Trebbe's information underneath on the speaker page. We'll have her name and then her bio, and then right next to her name and her topic of her interview will be her free gift information and how to get to her website and all of that.
Yeah, I can't remember what my free gift was. Can you remind me what it was?
Yeah, I'll bring it.
It had to do with a book.
I'll bring it up. You mentioned something about your book and your newsletter, as I remember, unless that's changed.
I'm sorry, I just can't remember.
Yeah. And so your best way of really contacting Trebbe is like what Trebbe mentioned earlier, being on her website, and I'll put that in the chat too. And it's probably actually easier because not many people are reading these chat transcripts to just get on to the speaker page and all our contact information is there. It's probably the easiest.
So whatever I said about my free gift, it still holds true, but I can't remember.
Yeah, it's back up there. But Trebbe, I just want to thank you so much for, and I'll bring up your free gift before we close out actually. So hold on 1 second just to make sure we're right. Yeah, it was your book. So your signed copy of your book, which is Radical Joy for Hard Times. Your third book, which is, I've been reading parts of it. It's this really inspiring book, and Trebbe writes very poetically throughout the book. It's just beautiful. So that is your free gift. And I just want to thank you for today, Trebbe. And I just hope that the viewers and listeners are getting a lot out of this, and that they reach out and maybe read some of your material, join you on the next Global Earth Exchange, which I would love to make it out to that.
Well, do it where you are.
Yeah.
You don't have to go anywhere.
Exactly. It's hard to go anywhere. I have 2 little ones too, but they would probably love getting out of
Oh
town.
yeah, kids are great. Kids love the Global Earth Exchange. They get to help heal Mother Earth.
Yeah. My daughter's name is Flora, so that's pretty earthy. So and she would love that because she likes the word Earth. She wanted to name our son Earth.
Oh, nice.
She likes the name Earth. But yeah, I just want to, before we go down any rabbit holes, I just want to thank you for today. Thank you so much for pouring your wisdom out to all of us. And Janet, thank you for interacting with us, and as well as Pamela. And the last council fire of this summit is tomorrow with at 4 o'clock, same time, 4 o'clock Eastern. So everybody can do the math for your time zone. But thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for asking me. Bye-bye.